Good morning. This is Rachel Hanrahan, Digital Content Specialist with Rural Lifestyle Dealer. Thanks for joining us for this morning's webinar with Lynn Woolf, Managing Editor of Rural Lifestyle Dealer, as she shares results from the 2020 Dealer Business Trends and Outlook Report. The report reflects data gathered from dealers across North America. Before we get started with the presentation, I have a couple of housekeeping items. On your screen, there is a control panel with a Q&A icon. You can submit questions here at any time during the presentation. Time permitting, we will look to answer as many questions as possible following the presentation. If for any reason your internet connection or even our connection should happen to fail at some point and it looks like the webinar has been interrupted, just go back to the email you received earlier telling you how to join the webinar, and you can re-enter the webinar that way. Okay, we are ready to get started. Thanks again for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you taking time today, and also really appreciate anyone on the line who submitted responses to the survey. It's really important to have that input from dealers. So as Rachel said, we will be looking at the dealer forecast from our annual report. And one thing to keep in mind throughout this report is it's positive. Dealers are positive. Our market is still growing. Dealers are seeing some strong demand, but there is some moderation. We saw a little bit last year, and there is, you can say moderation, maybe stabilization, but you'll see it show up here and there. So we'll talk about that. So this is our 12th annual survey. We're very proud of it. It's the only one of its kind in the industry. 151 respondents, and these were from dealers across North America. And we will be looking at things from revenue, aftermarket revenue, of course, along with looking at top products and concerns that dealers are facing. And we also asked this year some business metrics. So we'll be looking forward to seeing how those trends as we continue this survey in the coming years. So who answered the survey, who our readers are? At least half consider themselves managers or owners. So we know that these are the people that are involved with the numbers of the dealership. And then also more than 70% are 2.5 million or more in terms of revenue per year. The breakdown, the majority are from the US, 90%, with nearly 9% from Canada. So this is about how it breaks down every year. And generally, the respondents have 20 or fewer employees. You can see 75% here with 20 or fewer employees, but then a good share, 19% have 21 to 40 employees. So as we go along and talk about some of these breakdowns and some of these metrics, I'd be interested to hear from you just in terms of how they reflect what you're seeing in your own dealership. So if you've attended these webinars in the past, I've said that these are two of the numbers that I really look forward to seeing every year. You can see here that more than 68% of our dealers have been serving the market for more than 16 years. So they were early into the market. They've built up their market share, and I think that's a really important metric to watch just in terms of who our dealers are and how well they know the market. And then also this one is something that is another positive year after year is the change in the customer base. And so we look at kind of a rolling 5 years, and for the last 5 years, our dealers say that more than 50% say their market has grown 5 to 19% in the last 5 years. So that's significant, and it's even more significant when you look back at the surveys. And I've been doing the survey since 2012, and we've been seeing this number every year. So I think that's really good, really strong. It also shows, I think, how our dealers are reaching out to the variety of customers that make up a rural lifestyle segment. So getting to the numbers, what you all are interested in, overall, in terms of revenue, about 85% of dealers this year expect that this year will be as good as or better than last year. So you can see here that if we break it down further, about half expect increases of 2 to 8% or more. About 34% expect revenues to be about the same as last year, which was a good year. And then about 16% expect declines of 2% or more. And so you can see the changes from last year. Last year, about 64% expected revenue to increase 2% or more, and that compares with 50% this year. So that was just an early indication of some moderation or stabilization. Aftermarket forecast, aftermarket revenues are always strong for our dealers, and about 91% of equipment dealers expect 2020 to be as good as or better than 2019 for aftermarket revenues. That compares with 93% last year. So if we break it down a little bit further, 65% expect aftermarket revenues to increase 2 to 8% or more. 26%, little or no change, and then about 9% expect aftermarket revenues to decline 2% or more. So when we compare it with last year's survey, 61% expect increases of 2% or more, and that compares with 65% this year. So it looks like there's a little more optimism in terms of growth. So another number that we look at, of course, we'll get into 5-year trends, but we also look at something called weighted averages. And this is where we would toss out the about the same numbers and just look at increases compared with decreases. And so when we look at the weighted average for total revenue, the weighted average is 1.67 for 2020, and that compares with 2.43 for 2019, with the higher number being more positive. So again, the weighted average one for 2020, 1.67 compared with 2.43 in 2019. So if we look at aftermarket revenues, the weighted average, we're at 2.82, and that compares with 2.86 last year. So holding about steady on that for that weighted average. 5-year trends, you can see here on the chart, the decline for revenue forecast up 2% or more. So we're down 9% from last year, holding it at 50%. But you can see the upward climb for aftermarket revenue. So we're at 65%, and that's up from 61% last year. And actually, we're at a 5-year high for 5-year trends for aftermarket. And then going back to that revenue forecast, we're right at the low for the 5 years. As part of the survey, we look at what the brands are, and you can see that Kubota is the top respondent for all of the categories here. But there's a good representation, of course, from John Deere, New Holland, Massey Ferguson. One thing that was interesting when I looked at these was how Cub Cadet placed on them. It placed in the top 5 of all the categories measured. And then with zero-turn motor brands, you can see some other brands pop up. Grasshopper placed number 2 and Hustler number 5. One new question we asked this year was how utility vehicles were represented. So you can see here the breakdown, and so we will watch that going forward. So compare yourself with who you are and whether your brand is represented in the top 5. This was one question that was a new question this year that tried to look at some of the business metrics. And so we asked about whole goods inventory turns. And you can see that 37% of dealers are achieving whole good turns of 3 to 4 times a year. So with some of these questions, we went to Bob Clements International, and I talked with Sarah Hay, who works with dealers across North America, and tried to see what they're seeing in terms of their dealers. And she had said that rural lifestyle equipment dealers should be turning their equipment at least 2 times a year as average. And you can see that 53% say they turn 1 to 2 times. So I think our dealers are performing very well in that area. Aftermarket contribution. This is definitely a question that I would appreciate any feedback after the webinar about what you're seeing in your own dealership as we try to look how this might change over the years. But the majority say that their aftermarket revenues contribute 26 to 50% of their overall revenues. And of course, this is really important when we look at the forecast and the optimism and how important it is for those aftermarket dollars to the success of the dealership. Number of brands carried. The majority, more than 50%, carry 5 or fewer brands. You can see, though, that 11% carry more than 15 brands. And so then compare yourself how you fall in with the other numbers. So again, we went back to Sarah, and she said, although 15 is a lot of it depends on the complementary brands. So, and also I hear from dealers that sometimes if there's acquisitions, they take on more brands, and they don't want to abandon the customers that have already bought those brands. So I know that there's a lot of influencers in terms of the brands that you carry. And then also, you know, there's new entrants in the markets all the time. So I think it's, you know, might be something where dealers are trying new lines, trying to differentiate themselves, which is a good thing. So the dealer forecast for product potential, this is for increasing unit sales in 2020. Zero-turn mowers is number 1, and they've been number 1 really for the last few years. And one thing that was interesting this year is how high that chainsaw is placed, number 4. So that might be related to electrification. A new category that we looked at for product lines was compact excavators, and you see how they placed really high right away. So they're number 10 in the list here. Now we looked at 27 categories, and our full report has all of those categories. And so all you have to do is request that, and I can send that to you. So, and then we looked at how those numbers compared with last year, and throwing out the compact excavators because they were new, 6 of the 9 were actually down from last year. So again, some of that little moderation that's showing up. Another category, utility vehicles, last year were 3rd. They dropped to 9th. So feedback would be good on that. It might be related to, I don't know, maybe saturation, maybe just demand being down. And then also lawn tractors dropped to 14th from 7th. So just some of those changes, I think, that from happening year to year, you know, maybe there's not an overall trend with that, but we just always try to watch and see what's happening with those product lines. Again, that weighted average, and here you can see where chainsaws showed how dealers are, you know, really positive about it. Again, maybe related to the, you know, battery-powered models that are in the market. And but you can see some of the changes from last year with the optimism for zero-turn mowers being down, as well as tractors less than 40 horsepower, rotary cutters, and then hay tools and balers have stayed about the same from last year. So we also ask how dealers are expanding their lineups, and here you can see zero-turn mowers again at the top of the list. Generally, the top 5 have remained about the same. Sometimes, you know, rotary cutters make the top 5. Hay tools sometimes make the top 5, but generally these top 5 remain about the same. One thing, though, that here zero-turn mowers moved up to the top spot from number 4 last year. So definitely across the board, dealers are optimistic about zero-turn mowers. And then again, the compact excavators, which is a new product line that we looked at this year, they placed number 6. So I know that there's new models being introduced by manufacturers, so it looks like dealers have some optimism about that product line. We ask about rental, and about 40% every year say that they have a rental department. Sometimes it's, this year is actually 41%. I think it's gone as high, maybe 44% or 45%. But generally less than half of our dealers say they have a rental department, with skid steer loaders generally being the number 1 product that is rented by our equipment dealers. And here you can see again where compact excavators is showing up as number 2. So, and the rest of the categories are really those products, those work products that people need for some of those bigger projects, whether they're, you know, consumers or landscapers. Hourly labor rate, this was a new question this year, about 56% charge between $76 and $100 an hour, and 24%, so almost a quarter of our dealers, are charging more than $100 an hour. So I know that this varies, by region, maybe definitely within a state, probably. So we asked Sarah again about this, and she said that as opposed to comparing yourself with other dealers, you should look to be 10% below your local Ford dealer's rate. But then also, she said that it really depends on what you need to hire good service techs. So those labor rates should reflect what you need to have, who you need to have in your market, or I'm sorry, in your department, so that you can have those good aftermarket revenue numbers. Dealer concerns, so this flows right back from the last chart. With getting those employees, finding good employees is the #1 concern. It's been the perennial #1 concern over the years. Healthcare programs and costs and low sales margins, they generally swap from year to year. There's a lot of talk this year about the Affordable Care Act, and this year and last year about repealing some of that. So that might be why healthcare is again this year also being election year. So, and low sales margins really is just always a top concern. One thing that has changed from previous years is big box stores. It jumped up to #4 this year, and last year it was #8. So there has been some news about manufacturers and entering big box stores, and so that might be influencing some of the concerns here for dealers. And then you can see some of the other concerns here that generally place toward the bottom. We haven't seen much in our market for dealer purity as much as the ag equipment market has seen. So that's something to watch. Warranty claims, something that dealers always have to get a handle on, whether just simply, being able to have staff on hand to file those claims, and then just getting the response that they need from manufacturers on that. So we looked at how dealers are improving for the year and how they hope to take advantage of changes within their dealership to capture more revenue. And about 57% expect to modernize their shop and service department, again, reflecting how important aftermarket revenue is for our dealers. About 47% expect to improve their retail space. We know how much the influence of the consumer market, big box stores, mass retailers, the outdoor stores, how much they impact the perception of consumers when they come into dealerships. And so dealerships are really trying to improve that in-store experience. And business information systems, about 30% say they expect to make investments this year, and that compares with 37% last year. One thing we did ask, we asked polls every week, and we had a recent poll where we asked about an automated CRM system, and 61% say they don't have an automated CRM system. So, and when we've talked over this past year, and we have a couple webinars coming up, and podcasts, as well as our Dealer Success Academy, we talk about the importance of data with sales. And so just something to consider if you don't want to make an investment in automation. Find other ways, Excel spreadsheets, anything to make sure that you're capturing data for your customers. This was a good change this year that we saw. We asked about when customers come into your store, whether they request a specific brand. And about 63% of Rural Lifestyle customers, they request a brand when they come into the store, according to our dealers, and that's up from 52% last year. So that 52% last year really has held steady for the previous years. So that we would consider that to be quite a change, 10% in that. That might be related to some national advertising, TV advertising that some manufacturers are doing. I'd appreciate your input about whether you see some other influences on that, but that's definitely a change from last year. And then where our dealers really shine is that when they can get them in the store, about 78% say their product recommendations are accepted most of the time or almost always. That number holds steady from year to year. It's a very good number, usually at least 75%. So if, 75 to 80% of your customers are accepting your product recommendations, I think that speaks volumes for how they respect the dealers, and how much our dealers are connecting with their customers. It would be interesting to see if dealers could even bump that up to 90%. So that's a big task to make that leap, but it's just really such an advantage that our dealers have. So we also asked some open-ended questions, and if you go online to the link below, you can see all of the answers, and we got some really interesting responses and a lot of responses from dealers, so we really appreciate that. We did try to group them, and so you can see at the top there was talk about opportunities for new locations, marketing, new product lines, technology sales, online sales, service, rental, and then of course margins. So our dealers all over the place are looking for growth, and I think that just speaks to how our dealers are working hard to grow their dealerships. This one particular comment stood out for me, looking at the influence of battery products. This dealer is from California, where they have a huge push, he says, for battery. And he's saying that landscape contractors, particularly in that state, have a huge push to go to battery. A lot seems to be showing up in terms of noise restrictions, which may have some influence on that, throughout the United States, with blowers in particular. And then he also talks again about the branding. So he looks for brands that sell service and quality. So the strength of your brand is so important in getting them into the store, and then for dealers to capitalize on that. And again, he says that no one can match our knowledge and service. So we also asked open-ended questions about top concerns, and the link on the bottom again takes you to all of those answers. There was a lot of response, and we tried to group again. So finding employees, definitely this year, with it being election year, economy, politics, costs and margins, and marketing and competition. So this quote stood out to me, although there were a lot of good quotes, but he was talking about trying to handle the volume of work. So the demand is coming into the dealership, but the obstacle there is that limited workforce. So in terms of what to watch, we always like to see what's going on with technology, especially after going to GIE every year in October. And Alan Brown is one of our technology contributors, and he's a technology consultant. And definitely what we saw this past year, there was some new entrants for the commercial sized electric mowers, autonomous mowers, as well as the idea of connected mowers. So, and that would be connected with mobile devices, so that you might have some interface there with operation or with diagnostics. And then one thing he brought up was the idea of these changes with electronic drives and how they might influence how mowers are designed. So that might be something definitely, probably not this next year, I wouldn't think, but maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, where we might even see some new changes overall with zero-turn mower design. Economic influences that we are looking at, especially because our market is really influenced by the consumer market. So we always look at unemployment rate, and you can see it was 3.5% in December, and that was down 3.9% from a year earlier. So it doesn't look like it's getting any better in terms of the employment pool out there. So it's just a challenge that every business is facing right now. A positive indicator is home building, and we always look at the National Association of Home Builders and the Wells Fargo Housing Market Index. And recently that showed that home builders are the most confident they've been in 20 years. So with home building comes lawns and properties, which translate into equipment sales. So we look at, just in terms of the economic outlook, Alex Chazovsky of ITR Economics is an economist that we've been talking with for the last couple years, and there is some up and down forecast over the next 2 to 3 years. So breaking down his forecast, he looks at a mild and brief recession in the mid-2020 timeframe, so right in the middle of a selling season. But then he looks at, by the second half, there's going to be an emergence of the next rising trend. with 2021 being a growth year. So, and then for 2022 and 2023, looking at a more substantial downturn. So definitely within the next year or two would be something that dealers probably need to start preparing for in terms of that downturn. They're still holding fast to their prediction, or their forecast, I should say, that 2030, there will be a really significant downturn. So the next few years will be definitely important for businesses overall, and important for our dealers to be ready for some changes. So we do have some of these topics that we're going to be looking at in our upcoming Dealer Success Academy. So we'll be looking at marketing, online engagement of customers, how to get them into your dealership, of course, looking at sales, the service department, how to make more easy ways to make more money in your service department, along with a dealer who's going to be talk about how they hope to be debt-free by 2026. And then continuing with our safety focus that we have been really working on this last year, and talking with an expert on OSHA inspections. So I would just encourage everybody to go to dealersuccessacademy.com. This is our free, no cost online on-demand event, and we'll be looking more with strategies for how to address some of these topics that have been brought up in the dealer forecast. Another thing I wanted to share is that we do have nominations open for our Dealership of the Year. And so please go on and take pride in your store. Just do the nominations. You can nominate yourself. And there is a qualification stage that's the second step, but the first step is quite easy. So we just encourage everybody to just nominate your dealership. I think the pride that you have can really radiate down to all of your employees. And congratulations to Alex Power Equipment, who was our single store recipient for 2019, and Jacoby Sales, our multi-store recipient. And these were two quotes that that were shared in our feature stories that really stood out to me. And with Alan Buse from Alex Power Equipment talks about the idea of change. And I think that's something that our dealers are well familiar with, especially those dealers who have changed from selling the majority of their sales coming from ag equipment. And then Jacoby Sales are a 90-year dealership. They talked about longevity. And again, this goes back to the other point we made earlier about the strength of our dealers, and that longevity, the family owned, all of those things are really important to customers. You know, the local shopping, really important messages that our dealers have to their advantage. So those were the facts that I wanted to share. And if you are interested in the full report that dives a little bit further into some of the 10-year trends, as well as looks at all of those 27 product categories, please just email me and I can send you that report. And I encourage you to take our weekly polls. They're really important for us to monitor what's going on in the market, to look for story ideas, and just to serve you better. And then again, here's the link to the Dealership of the Year form. So thank you. And Rachel, I'll stand by if you have any questions that came in.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. Yes, we do have a few questions that have come in. The first one is, in what regions are farm consolidations trending upwards most notably?
I don't monitor those numbers of consolidations. I can do some research on that, though. We have some sister publications, Farm Equipment Magazine and Ag Equipment Intelligence. So I can check with those, some of the data that they watch, and check with some of those editors, and I'll just make a note. And then I know we have your contact information, so I'll see what I can find on that front.
All right. And what are the trends and impacts by region of customer services?
We do have, I don't have those numbers handy. I could go back and look and maybe pull some numbers by region. I think that maybe if this person wanted to get in touch with me, I could understand more about what you're looking for. So maybe I could try and pull some of those numbers more specifically to better understand it. We don't generally pull by region for this survey, but I can do that if that's something of interest to people. So just let me know on that.
All right. I don't see any more questions. Lynn, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I think just two topics that really come to mind. We talk a lot about technology, in the magazine and as we're talking with our podcast experts, and definitely with battery powered technology. And I think there is definitely a good belief out there that there isn't that demand yet, that it's too expensive. I mean, I think some of the power concerns are being addressed by manufacturers. I think the biggest point that I hear when I talk to dealers and I talk to experts is the idea that, battery powered equipment is an influencer in the market. It's just an influencer in autos. It's even an influencer in your mobile phones. So it's just really something that dealers, it's coming. It will continue to be adapted. I mean, we see companies like Briggs and Stratton and Steel, with introductions into the market. So it's something that dealers have to look into. They have to decide how much they want to embrace it based on their local market. But it's definitely something that's here. It's going to continually improve on, and it really will be a differentiator, I believe. And then one other topic I wanted to talk just briefly about is the idea about how our dealers struggle so much with employees. And it's something that we will look at throughout the year, and we've done some stories on this. One dealership we talked with, definitely they've looked at the idea of internships, which you all have looked at, but they've also looked at even going down and talking with middle school students for some career fairs, partnering with chambers of commerce and looking at maybe some support from economic development in counties. So it's just something that dealers really just have to continue to work at. There are good employees out there. You'll find them. Just keep working at it, I think.
All right. Thank you so much.
And really,
sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. And I just want to thank everybody for participating. If you've got any questions, I just encourage you to contact me directly. And thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Rachel.
All right. Well, today's presentation and audio will be made available on rurallifestyledealer.com in the event you'd like to go back and review it. Watch your email and e-brief newsletter for more information. On behalf of the entire Rural Lifestyle Dealer staff, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. When you leave the webinar, you will be directed to a short survey. Please feel free to reach out to us and let us know what you thought of the live event and if there are any topics you'd like us to cover in future webinars. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.